In this video, we're going to look at some examples of SMART and how the framework helps ensure goals, objectives and tasks are clearly defined and actionable. SMART works as a checklist, but in practice objectives don't usually fail because someone forgot a letter of the acronym. They fail because the conditions for success aren't in place. So let's look at what SMART does well and where it still needs support. Now, a reminder before we begin. The SMART criteria don't need to be delivered in the order of the acronym, and not every element needs to be included every time. But two elements are always critical: specific and time. What is required and when it should be done should always be stated. How it will be judged, why it's being done, and whether it's achievable will depend on context. Let's start with a simple example. I need you to pull together a waste report by the end of the week. On the face of it, that sounds like a fairly straightforward task. We know what's needed and when it's needed. If the person receiving the task routinely produces waste reports, that should be enough information for them to get the task done. But if they don't, it immediately raises questions. What period should the report cover? Do you want waste across the whole site or just for a particular unit? What's the reason for the report? Has there been an issue? Who else will the report go to? If I don't have all of the data to hand, will Monday be okay? At this point, one of two things usually happens. Either progress stalls whilst the person waits for the answers, or they produce a report guessing what's required. That can create unnecessary delay, rework, or anxiety. Now compare that with this version. By 3 p.m. on Friday, produce a waste report covering the last 8 weeks for your unit, showing volume by waste type for each shift. The report will be shared with operations managers to inform the upcoming continuous improvement projects. Nothing about the task itself has changed, but now we have clarity. SMART removes uncertainty and allows people to focus on delivery rather than interpretation. Now let's move to a much more complex example. This one is a fairly typical business objective set by a senior leader. Let's say it's being set during the month of May. Produce a fully costed 36-month business plan covering growth, staffing, compliance requirements and financial forecasts, with quarterly review milestones to be approved by the board at the September meeting. This looks like a good SMART objective. It's specific. There's a clear time frame that appears reasonable. The relevance isn't stated explicitly, but it's easy to assume that this is about future-proofing the business. And yet, this objective failed. Despite repeated reminders, progress stalled. Conversations kept drifting back to short-term operational issues. Other directors disengaged from planning meetings, and the whole process lost momentum. Planning work was rushed, superficial, and, eventually, dropped altogether. The important point here is that this objective didn't fail because it wasn't SMART. It failed because the conditions for success weren't in place, which undermined its achievability. In this case, the business had grown through strong relationships and experience without the need for formal planning. The directors had relied on instinct and judgment. Planning felt like paperwork, something theoretical that added little value. They also had little experience of long-term planning. They were being asked to think 36 months ahead for the first time and to translate uncertainty and complexity into assumptions and scenarios. Without support, that felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. On top of that, changes in the industry, particularly new legislation, felt distant and abstract. The impact wasn't yet visible in day-to-day operations, so dealing with immediate pressures continued to dominate attention. Technically, the objective was SMART, but the belief, capability and context were missing. Now let's look at an alternative version of the same objective. Produce a fully costed 36-month business plan covering growth, staffing, compliance and financial forecasts, informed by upcoming legislative changes. This will be achieved through a structured planning process supported by external insight, director development sessions and facilitated quarterly planning workshops. Plans will be presented for approval at the September board meeting, and progress will then be reviewed on a quarterly basis. The difference here isn't just wording. The conditions for success are built in, and this version explicitly addresses the why. Before planning began, the leadership team reviewed the likely impact of new legislation on costs, risks and operations. They could see that complexity in their industry was increasing and that relying on instinct alone was becoming risky. Planning was reframed from something that we should do to something we need to do to stay in control. Facilitated sessions broke long-term planning into manageable steps. Assumptions, risks, and scenarios were worked through together rather than being left to individual directors to figure out alone. Planning became a shared leadership activity, not an administrative task. As confidence grew, engagement increased. The plan evolved through collaboration, not last-minute drafting. And because the directors understood why it mattered and had shaped it together, the plan was actually used, not just approved and forgotten about. This objective succeeded not because it was more smart, but because belief, capability, and context were addressed. This highlights an important point. Smart helps bring structure and clarity, but on its own, it doesn't guarantee success. Objectives still need to be challenged, explored from different angles, and pressure tested before they're set. In the next video, we'll show how these 6 thinking hats can be used as a practical tool to test smart objectives before they're agreed. We'll look at how it helps teams surface assumptions, identify risks, explore alternatives, and strengthen objectives so they have a far greater chance of succeeding in practice, not just on paper.